Welcome to the Tao of Pizza, where we feature top logistics leaders, entrepreneurs, and supply chain innovators and share their inspiring stories with a holistic twist.
Mark Hiddleson here, host of the Tao of Pizza podcast, where I talk with top industry innovators in the warehousing, logistics, and supply chain business with a holistic twist. Before introducing today's guests, this episode is brought to you by Specialized Storage Solutions. Look, I've been in the logistics and storage industry for several decades now. I know I don't look that old, but it's true. We provide industry-leading warehouse storage solutions nationwide. So basically, if you have a warehouse that needs rack, shelving, carts, conveyors, or mezzanines, we help with design, engineering, installation, inspections, and repairs to help clients optimize their logistics operations. You know what, Vicki? It's funny. Sometimes people don't even realize we can actually help with permit acquisition services as well. We take a holistic look at your entire business ecosystem supply chain to develop the resources for continually improving your operation. To learn more, give me a call at 707-732-3892. And I also give podcast listeners my personal email, which is markhiddleson@aol.com. So if you're ready to take your warehouse storage and retrieval systems to the next level, give me a call. Today, I'd like to give a shout out to all of the gifted professionals I studied with over the years at JFK University. I'm delighted to see their work in the world. People like Christine Garvin, Kay Sadowski, Trudy Schaefer, Donald Gerard, and Selena Lee, just to mention a few. And today's guest is one of the most gifted and inspiring master teachers that I've ever worked with over the years. And while most of our guests have been great clients, vendors, or referral partners, we've also been lucky enough to host some of my best coaches, best-selling authors, and mentors who really made an impact for me personally in my personal life and career. Now, Vicki Dello Joio is a life-changing workshop leader, Qigong energy master, teacher, and inspirational speaker. Since 1975, her brand of brilliance has empowered wellness-motivated and spiritually inclined seekers to infuse body, mind, spirit practices into their very cells so that they can tap into their birthright of joy, use it as fuel, not a goal, for a lifetime. She's a popular host of a monthly program, Qi Talks, and a Hall of Fame recognized teacher of the Chinese Art of Qigong by the Association of Women Martial Arts Instructors. Vicki's quote-unquote spiritual fitness program and book, The Way of Joy, has transformed the lives of thousands of participants since 1976. Vicki, I'm so thrilled to have you with us today on the Tao of Pizza.
Oh, Mark, it's a true honor. And, even if I didn't know you and already so deeply respect you, the Tao of Pizza would have been enough. I love the title of this podcast.
I'm glad you said that because your work was one of the inspirations for the name, and it's funny. There's this verse in the Tao Te Ching. I don't know. I think it's like 24 or something, but it says she teaches without speaking, and it's so true of you because I took your workshops back in the early 2000s as part of my master's degree, and really felt the practice, but I never knew until 15 or 20 years later that it was called Tao. I was already practicing it with you. So, I think the real treasure with the Tao Te Ching in the verses is that there's a hidden step-by-step practices
Yes.
to do it. And I was lucky enough to practice it for 10 years before I even knew what it was. So
I love it.
before we get started, talk a little about energy. What you mean by energy? Because I thought, that was one of the most transformational things for me is how you talk with and work with energy.
Well, there's a lot of different ways to think about energy. Of course, it can be just that get up and go thing that we want to have. Sometimes we crave to have in the early mornings. But I think that, basically Qigong, which is what you worked with together at JFK all those years ago, is a practice that works with energy in the same way that acupuncture or acupressure does. So this is based on a Chinese medicine, the meridian system, where you can see that there's basically lines of energy that are connected to organs, to seasons, to all kinds of different things. There's a lot of different things associated. in both classical and traditional Chinese medicine. Energy is basically an elusive thing. I think in terms of, it's something that's very difficult to measure or be tangible. So sometimes for the Western mind, it's a little hard for us to wrap our minds around it. But it's basically what helps us function, what helps us, what it is. You know energy when you go to a party and you see somebody and they walk into the room and you either go, oh no, I'm not going to be anywhere near that person, or oh, who's that? I'm really interested in hearing what they have to say. That's an energy. That's an energy field that gets called Wei Qi, or externalized energy. We know we respond to energy whether we realize it or not. Sometimes we just think, oh, they're attractive or not attractive, but what is it that's actually behind that? What is it that creates a charisma, or that creates a sense of magnetic interest? That's all energy. And then, of course, how energy flows is what Chinese medicine is based on.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll get more into it as we go, because there is energy is involved in that. And when I read your bio, it was one of those coincidences. I'm one of those people who believes in coincidences, which means I don't believe in coincidences. It's kind of a paradox, or what do you mean? And I was thinking about 1975, and because Fritjof Capra wrote another book. One of the reasons it's called the Tao of Pizza is because the Tao of Physics was too hard. And I like that Fritjof Capra.
Nobody would listen. Everybody wants to know about pizza.
So the Tao of Physics was a book that was written in 1975. It was a bestseller by a really smart Austrian. What's Fritjof Capra? He's like an astrophysicist or something, like super smart physicist.
Yeah.
And I really, in 1975, my first exposure, I was thinking about, I was in the late 70s. One of my first exposures to Asian culture was, we had a Chinese New Year celebration, and we did this dragon thing with our class. And I was chosen to be the head of the dragon. And it's because I was the biggest kid, and we had built this head, and I was the only one who could lift it up. And it reminds me of your practice. I mean, that feeling of holding and being able to lift something and be the leader. It was like that first point. It was kind of embodied leadership. They're like, well, you're going to be the leader because you can carry the head.
Yeah.
And so how did you get the idea to really, you've transformed a martial art into a way of joy practice? How did you come up with the idea for that?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I don't think anyone's quite asked me in that way before. I think that I started doing martial arts way back in the early 70s because I think that originally I wanted to learn how to defend myself, and also how to kind of break through obstacles, like, take that kind of thing. It would take, how do you break through a board, or something with your bare hand or something like that. What does that mean, and what does that take? I was very interested in it. But I think I really started because I wanted to know how to defend myself on the street. I'd had some times that I had been attacked on the street. And so that's, I think, what originally drew me to martial arts. I had actually started with Tai Chi Chuan, which is in some theories, there's a lot of different beliefs about this, but basically I agree that Tai Chi Chuan is one branch of Qigong, because Qigong is actually a word like dance. There's a lot of Qigong is it's a, people say they do Qigong. It could be, well, do you do Alvin Ailey style dance, or are you a ballet dancer, you tap dancer? What kind of dance do you do? So Qigong is a relatively new term that came up, that they brought up in China in the 50s to encompass anything that any of these practices that included intention and breath and either external movement or internal movement. So it's really one of these broad things. So I studied Qigong with a lot of different master teachers, had a lot of influences, went after I had studied Tai Chi for a while, I went and studied harder fighting arts, and then came back to Qigong. I have a lot of stories about why I came back to Qigong, but the briefest one is that I was walking down the street one day, and I had been training in Kajikembo, which is a pretty intensive fighting form. And I had been fighting a lot with my partner at the time. And our teacher, for some reason, and her wisdom, would have us pit against each other. So we were sparring at the school, and then I would, we'd go home and we'd be yelling. It was a horrible time in my life. Although since, she was this ex-partner was a beautiful martial artist. But in any case, I was walking home thinking, I'm tired of kicking and hitting. I'm tired of hurting people. I'm tired of getting hurt. I want to find another way. And as I was walking down the street, and I think most women can be a little bit wary at certain times of night, or they see certain people. And so somebody came around the corner, and it was the same thing that I said, when you see somebody come into a party and you want to avoid them or you're drawn to them. This was like, there was a little uh-oh that happened in my mind. And I just sort of lengthened my spine. He reached out to grab me, and his hand bounced about, I'd say 6 inches to a foot away from actual contact. And he walked away, looking at his hand and then looking at me and looking at his hand. So I knew he hadn't missed, but that he had actually felt something. And I found out later from one of my Qigong teachers that there was this field called Way Qi, and I had instinctively activated it. That fascinated me, to think that there was this actual palpable thing that you could actually feel. And for people who see auras, you can see. And so that's what got me into the Qigong. And then as I studied more and more Qigong, and thought about what I'd learned from that, and also what I'd learned, because I'm also a theater performer and director, and what I'd learned from theater and performing and that kind of thing, which also is an energy behind it, right? That's like what makes you what makes your audience lean forward is it has to do with a certain energy that the performer emits. That I started to think about all of those things together. And then the Way of Joy was born out of that. But it was really born out of my study of my particular little corner of understanding of Taoism. Taoism is a very vast philosophy, and I just really loved it. And I began to think about these different concepts that are embedded in Qigong, called Shen, Qi, and Jing, which is basically heaven, human, and earth. 3 different, I call them realms of consciousness, but they're basically 3 different ways in which we operate as humans. Because in Qigong, they say humans, our task is to bring heaven down to earth and earth up to heaven, which means take these ideas that we get, and I can talk more about this, but I can go on, and I want to hear what you have to say. But,
keep going. Yeah.
So the heaven realm has to do with our perspective, our ability to sort of see the whole picture, to have a sense of inspiration, connection to the divine, or to that higher power, or your own wise self. The human has to do with how we take that wisdom from above, and how we start to work with it, how we create our boundaries, how we express ourselves, especially from the heart, because the heart is the center of the human realm, center of actually everything. And then the earth realm has to do with what we manifest, what we do with, we've taken a great idea, and then we start to filter it through our own personal life experience. And then what do we do? How do we walk our talk? So those concepts of these 3 different realms was how the Way of Joy was born. That, and thinking about my name, because my name is Victoria Dello Joio, which means victory of joy. And so I started to ask myself, what kind of legacy is that? What am I being asked here? What does it mean to be victorious in joy? What does that look like? And so Way of Joy was born partly to honor or respect what had been gifted to me.
Wow, that is beautiful. And then to embody it. And it does, the practice for me, it gave me, and it's one of those things that, that which can be called the great Tao is not the true Tao. So when I start to talk about it, but I felt like I had access to something that I knew was there. Mm. And then it became part of me, and part of me showing up, and part of that access, it was really being able to be more, I guess, fully present, and then hiding, less about myself, just be more authentic. Authenticity is another way that these, and I call them moving meditations. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely.
Is that for me, meditation, I wanted to practice it, and I do it, but I'm like this go-getter guy. And for me, to start with something that was more movement-based, and even if, like you said, there's internal movements, and just being able to work with that, And then a lot of fear just dropped. I mean, those little low-level fears of anxiety. And I've always been in sales. And so a lot of times, either rejection, or you go into people and, no matter how great your energy is, or your people are like this.
Uh-huh.
And
Mhm.
so you're working with you was just so much, I was able to work with it, but now I was able to kind of transform that energy into something that's like, okay, this is my body, and my body's more of an ally instead of, oh, my body's betraying me, because now my heart's going like this. I'm stuttering a little bit, and I still stutter. I still get nervous, but I
Sure.
know, okay, this is something my body is doing something great, and then I can wait for my body to adjust. It's
I love what you're saying, Mark. It makes so much sense. I always sort of thought you were a brother in this, because I also had that sense of learning some of these different practices over time was like coming home to myself. It was like, how do I match my internal with my external? And if I'm nervous, for example, I work a lot with performers. And so if there's, stage fright, right? I'm a performer myself, and I also direct shows and direct speakers and all of that kind of thing. And it's like, how do we transform this clogged energy, that stage fright, where we start to go, off into our heads of the what ifs and get hijacked outside of ourselves? How do we pull ourselves back to center quickly and allow our bodies to kind of be a barometer of like what is needed right now to really stand in our power? And I think that you sort of recognize that really early on. I still remember you from, I mean, I had a lot of students at JFK, but you were a standout because you got it so quickly. You got it so quickly.
you're gonna if you're gonna if you're gonna make me cry, we're gonna go back into combat qigong. As- Thank you for saying that. It brings up a lot of emotions. Like when you do find that home, there is this emotional, and it's a place. And I appreciate that. And it's funny, it does. And also you sharing your story that you started out in fighting to defend yourself. Most of the martial arts practice, I've practiced Aikido. Wendy Palmer was another person I studied with at JFK. And it's the non-violent art of protecting your attacker. You're not just defending yourself, but you're protecting, and it's this great place of home. And I also wanted to be able to break someone's sternum with 3 pounds of pressure. You feel safe in
Yes.
that too. And I honor that you've had to protect yourself physically over the years, as it's in cities, right? You've always lived in a city, urban place. Was it San Francisco or Oakland or?
I live in Oakland now, but I was in San Francisco before, and I grew up in New York City. So yeah, very urban based, although I do have a home now in the country, so I get to spend time in nature as well. So yeah.
Nice, nice. So I wanted to ask you what the early days of starting your practice were like, and also a big part of what you taught me is that to be in tune with the seasons. And because every year has 4 seasons, and then I think in careers have seasons, and lives have seasons. So it's kind of a big question, but how do you bring in the seasons into your work, and how does it relate to how you got started, and kind of how things evolved?
Well, so if I would think about how I get started, I guess I would think about spring, right? Because that's the early part of it. I think that how I got started is, like I said, I wanted to learn how to defend myself. And when I first encountered Tai Chi Chuan, I was 17 years old, 16 or 17 years old, and I was in a theater program actually in San Francisco that was for high school students, or yes, high school students. And for some reason, and it was an acting program, and they brought in a Tai Chi teacher for actors. And I was, I had never heard of Tai Chi. I didn't know what it was. And this old man, he probably was 50 or 60, which now, when looking back, it's not so bad. But
Super
anyway,
young in my book.
Yeah, right. But his big claim to fame was that his wife had just had a baby, and so this it was a Tai Chi was a proof of his virility. And as a young lesbian, I could have cared less about his virility or anybody's virility at that point. But I remember that when we started doing the movement of Tai Chi, it was like what we said before. It was really coming back. I felt like, oh, I know this. It was almost like I was remembering it as opposed to learning something new. It felt so right. I don't know even how else to say it. Um, in any case, if I just switch over to talking about the seasons for a moment, and one of the things I love about Qigong is that it's based very much on nature, on the study of nature, whether it's animals, insects, or mythic animals, or it's the seasons and how nature functions. So each season, it's actually there's 5 seasons in the 5 element theory or of Chinese medicine, and so that means that there's basically starts spring, summer, end of summer is its own season, and then fall, and then winter. And right now we're in the fall season, at least when we're recording this. And autumn is on my mind these days because I'm about to teach a workshop, as we were talking about before, this weekend. A little 90-minute workshop that's working with people on some basic fall practices. So each season in Chinese medicine and in Qigong has a bunch of associations. So for fall, it's associated with the organ of the lungs. When we go into winter, we move into the kidneys. Spring is liver. End of summer is stomach, spleen, pancreas, and then. So anyway, did I skip one? Summer is heart, and then end of summer is stomach, spleen, pancreas. But in the fall, we're working with the lungs and the associated organ, which is the large intestine. And these organs are all about being able to release, particularly the large intestine, right? That's about releasing, letting go of the old matter. In the same way that trees drop their leaves and their energy goes down into the sap as they prepare for winter. That's the same thing that happens to us on an energetic level. It's a time of contraction, of pulling back in, going back to the essence. The fall is connected to the element of metal, which I grew up in New York City, so I always think of all the bare bones of the buildings that are constantly under construction there. That there's that sense of what is the essence? Who are you at core? So you said yourself that here you're this big strapping guy, and yet you had this core part of you that really resonated with these different types of practices that were more, we could say, spiritual or more esoteric. That would, people may not expect that from seeing you, that you have this draw to that kind of work. That draw, that inner essence of who we are. In a way, it's almost irrelevant what we look like at that point. It's really about what is at the very core center of who you are. What is it that's sustained? When I was a little kid, I used to spend a lot of time, for some reason, looking in a mirror and looking just at my eyes. And I still do that sometimes. I just check in and I look at my eyes. They say that's the window of the soul.
Yeah.
And even though the face around the eyes has definitely aged and changed a whole lot, there's still something that's consistent from those very, very early days when I would look. And I think that anybody who looks in their own eyes will see that that's what the metal element is all about, is this kind of core eternal part. And it's a time, like I said, of contraction, of preparing for the winter, of pulling in, because the summer is all about expansion. It's the heart. It's all about passion and being free and producing. And then the end of summer is time of harvesting. So there's a transition between end of summer into fall, and the end of summer is a really transitional time where we're really working with expansion and contraction as a theme. And this is a theme that I think is super important to think about, because one of the things I think people often don't realize is that every expansion is followed by a contraction, right? So there's a sense that we expand, just like our lungs expand and then contract, or the flowers open and close, or the ocean, the tides go in and come out. And so it's the same kind of thing that we are nature. I
Right.
just in a session with another Qigong teacher recently, and she was talking about how there's not us and nature. We are nature. that we expand and contract. And a lot of times, particularly in the kind of culture here in the West, in the US, that says, particularly in a business context, that businesses to be successful have to expand and then expand and then expand and then expand. That's not really the natural way of things. Everything comes back in and then expands further. So it's not that more expansion can't happen, but we don't allow ourselves that yin, that coming back in, that sense of coming back home to ourselves. So there's a form, a Qigong form called transition that really works with being able to expand and then contract with the sense of openness. Because for me, I mean, I'm a little bit of a type A, type 2. My mom used to bust me on that, right? I teach Qigong for a living. I'm in spiritual, all this, but I have this pretty New York nitty gritty, go, go, go part of me, right?
Yeah, you started out to be a good fighter.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and I used to do a lot of when I was a young performer, I perform, and then after every show, I would have this contraction, and I would be like, get back in the box. It would be this self-punishing way of making myself small, or if business was not going as well as at one point as was it another. It's like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I'm failing. There's a way that we don't give ourselves room to just come back to that small self, to that sense of rest, a reevaluation, a time of just being kind of peaceful and listening in, a time of really going into that inner wisdom. And fall is all about that. I love this season for that reason, because I've really learned to embrace contraction, so that I actually stopped performing for 10 years because I felt like I was in this addictive mode of like trying to be out there all the time, and then harsh contraction, and then doing another show, and then harsh contraction. I was like, this has to stop. So now I know every time I do something big, I'm going to need to put in some time that's really it's not just about rest, it's about listening in. What are the lessons? What is it that I want to shift? What is it? It's a time of, like I said, reevaluation.
Yeah, I call it active rest. It's active, like your rest, it's proactive rest. And you have to, it's one of I call my paradigms of principles of peak performance. And one of the paradigms is it's not always peak performance. I mean, it can't be. There's off season, there's postseason, there's preseason, and all those different, I'm going to say the rest is more, it's not that the rest is more important, but the rest is the one that we've ignored, the need for rest, rejuvenation, relaxation. And our culture is, and it seems like it's getting more and more and more, it's go, go, go. And
It really is. And it's so counterproductive in the long run. Because I know for sure when I push myself, when I'm at that time where it's like my whole body and my spirit is saying, stop, you need to stop. But I push myself, I never get anything done well, ever, never in my entire life. And when I do take that time to stop, and of course, anxiety and fear are like some part of the part that says, no, you can't do that. You've got to keep going, because that's sort of the soup, the sort of dysfunctional soup that's, that's connected to something that is a superimposed cultural norm that I think is just it's counterproductive, and it doesn't allow, first of all, it doesn't allow, for us to really be at peak performance. Like you said, we need to have these other times, but also it just steals the joy out of it, right? It just robs of what I believe is our essential birthright. Because the Way of Joy Qigong, I mean, my whole premise is that joy is a fuel, not a goal, that it's something where it's a birthright that every baby is born with until something happens and gets taken away through neglect or abuse or different things that might happen to a child as they grow up, but that every baby is born with this innate sense of joy. I've been to several births. I've been privileged to be asked to doula several births, and as well as doula several deaths. But to see every baby, I mean, I have one of my students once said his partner was a midwife, and he went to pick her up after a delivery, and she was holding this baby, and he looked at the baby and he said, that baby looks like a baby Buddha. And she said, all babies are baby Buddhas. So yeah, I think that sense of being able to really have a sense of coming back to essence is a real gift.
yeah. And the joy
And choice.
the joy goes through all of the seasons too. And I think for me, there's a difference. I love the word joy because it's different than happiness. I mean, to me, happiness has a lot to do with external circumstances. We can be happy about something, but joy is something that comes from within. It's a joy, and it can be joy even in sorrowful times. It's I've been in trouble for laughing at funerals before, but when you get together with people and you start sharing some of these stories, and that the human it's the joy, there's laughter with those memories, that you can still be in a state of sorrow and be experiencing joy at the same time.
Exactly. Absolutely, Mark. That I think of joy as being the container for all the emotions, that all emotions are in relationship to joy. And in my book, I actually talk about being at memorials and funerals where people will start talking, telling stories, and then all of a sudden there's this joy that bubbles up through laughter or even anger. Sometimes being able to really recognize anger as a maybe a warrior for social justice, or something that matters to you because it's about protecting joy. It's all has to do ultimately with this birthright that is a fuel, that is what we can draw on. And instead of thinking, if I have the right partner, if I have the right job, if I have the right circumstances, then I get to feel joy. If we think about it as a bottomless wellspring that we can draw on at any time, it really changes the perspective of how we make our choices. What we're discerning is going to help us or feed us or stop us. We can start to discern that when we start to think about joy as being the the the, the initial impulse.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So
that's truly the birth of the Way of Joy, was that thinking. Even more than my name, was that thinking, was like, what if there's something that we really thought of that we're entitled to, every being is entitled to, that it's part of what we can draw on, and it's really about how do we get there, how do we remember what we knew when we were baby Buddhas.
the baby, and it's in their bodies. Those babies are so great at communicating with their bodies, what they need, or their voices, or their tone of voice inflection, body
Yes,
language. They're these
yes.
great communicators. And that I was a young parent when I first started learning the Way of Joy. And I'm lucky because when I think about it, I took two different um, we had to do 12 of these for JFK for our master's degree. And I did two with you and I did two with Wendy, but one of them was Blossom in the spring.
Yes.
And then the other one, I only know it was in
The
the end of
lotus.
January or February. And the only
Oh.
reason I know that is because, and this is hard for me, but I missed the Super Bowl to practice with you. I'm a
Wow.
I'm a huge
Now you're saying something. I'm truly honored. I'm truly
I
honored.
remember I was on the phone. It was a Friday because your workshops for JFK was always like all day Friday, like from 3 in the afternoon until 9 o'clock at night. And I lived about an hour away, so it's till 10 or 11. I'm processing this stuff. So it was all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and I was on the way home from the Friday, and my best friend's like, "Hey, bud, what's your plan for the Super Bowl? What are you bringing? Like, what's going to be your dish?" And I was trying to explain to him what I was doing in Qigong. And I've been saying, or I say Qigong. Now, talking to you, I'm going to call it Qigong because you're Hall of Fame. So I'm going to change it to Qigong with the UN.
No, you're fine. No, you're good. You're good. It's loose.
It's Gong or Gung. So
Yeah.
he's like, Qigong, like, he's like, what are you talking about? I like, it's Tai Chi or anything. It's like, I've got this master. I'm like, I'm going to graduate and I need this for my graduation. And he's like, man, he goes, tell me when my friend Mark gets back. Because you're doing, and he called it, he goes, you're doing Who Flung Poo on Super Bowl Sunday. So I'll never forget that. So it must have been a winter practice. I think
Yeah,
it was
that's
like
it
mud
was
and lotus,
the crystal generator. It was the
crystal
crystal
generator.
generator and 3 gates of enlightenment. Those are the ones that I love to do the for the new year, the turning of and accessing the kidney chi of winter,
And it
being able
was,
to with the inner what's going on underneath the surface, right? Because a lot of times winter has a lot to do with what's in the unconscious and how do we bring it up, and it's also what do we manifest? How do we create a field of manifestation? So yeah.
And I remember you taught us something about reaching back and
Yes,
pulling the crap from and kind of reintegrating this
yeah,
the past into the future, like all the mud and the muck and the poop,
yeah.
and making it's actually nourishing what is going to
That
come
that's
forward.
in, that was in the blossom in the spring, right? Because the blossom in the spring, based on, well, basically, it's not the lotus necessarily, but if you think of a flower just bringing up everything from below the surface, the unconscious, it's basically turning, like you said, the poop into fertilizer, right? It's it's
Yeah.
it's it's looking at how do we what are the life lessons? How do we move forward as opposed to being stuck in the past or stuck with what was. How do we use it as something that helps us, better, smarter, wiser, and it's also part of who you are, because the difficulties and challenges that we've had in our lives are ultimately part of who we are. And so, who do we want to be with that? Do we want to stay victims, or do we want to say, this is what I'm going to move. This is how I'm going to move out of a victim mindset into something that really owns power.
Yeah, without and to transform a victim without becoming a bully. I mean, that's one thing
Exactly.
that I've
Absolutely.
worked with is this the shadow aspect of the victim is
Mm.
become a bully. And it's interesting in my life. I'm always a little embarrassed with how that comes up. It's like I can really be a bully.
I think it's
as,
part of the human condition. We all can.
yeah,
We all have an inner bully.
yeah,
And that bully, it usually bullies, the main theme for them is that they are feeling like victims. They're feeling
right.
victimized. You're not doing it right, or they're feeling victimized by whatever their history is telling them. They're still
So
feeling victim.
I'm excited. I want to know what is the best way for people to engage your work. If someone, and we're going to have links, I'm going to have a link to your book on my show notes, anything we talked about and I can reference. But what share with us what do you think right now? What's the best way to connect with your work?
Well, it depends on what you want. If you're interested in the qigong part of what I do, probably going to my website, which is my name, vickidellojoio.com. But I'm also looking a lot. My work, over the last 50 years of doing this, or 50 plus years, I hate to say, is really been morphing. And what I'm looking at these days is what I'm calling your power presence. How do we stand in our power, communicate from a true place of power? And I'm talking about power within as opposed to power over. Um, and whether you're speaking on a stage, live or virtual, or you're speaking to a colleague, a referral partner, to a potential client or customer, or if you're speaking to a kid or a grandkid, or to somebody else who is pushing back, and you're needing to really reclaim your own grounding, that's what's really interesting to me right now. So Qigong classes, I love teaching Qigong. I'll always be teaching Qigong, but Qigong has informed me a lot. So within the context of power presence, I'm really looking at the principles that I've drawn from Qigong, but I'm really looking at how do we bring ourselves back to center no matter what the challenge is. So no matter what it is that you're facing, how do you continue to find where flow is, look for not where you're getting stopped, but where can you flow, and come back to that center place so that you can really show up as your true self, as your most authentic self. Because when we're defended or pushing back or feeling anxious and scared, that's not your true self, right? And again, I'm thinking about this a lot because of autumn being about coming back to that essential self. Um, and so I have just written it's an e-guide called it's called uh, I think so. Let's get real about charisma. 3 keys um, to inspire and motivate your audience every time you speak. And so it's geared towards speakers and performers. But even if you're not that and you have zero interest in it, I think there's a lot of information in that guide that really is about that you can use even if you're about to have a conversation with somebody who intimidates you, or even if they don't intimidate you, but you want to show up as your most powerful and radiant and magnetic self. These are some basically, and some of them are the Qigong exercises and other types of techniques that helps us come back to our own grounding. So that for people to get that, that's a free ebook that I've just put out called, so that's yourpowerpresence.com. Yourpowerpresence.com. People can go right there and download that free guide. And I'd love
Awesome.
it to do because
Awesome.
it's my passion right now. It's like, it's just hot off the presses. I just finished it a couple of weeks ago.
Awesome. So anyone who listens to this, I'm going to put it right in the show notes. So when the episode is released, and it'll be right in the show notes, they'll be able to go to that ebook, that guide. And I'm going to challenge everyone. I'm going to be the first. I'll be the first to get that, because I love it. A part of my career is being a public speaker. And now that's one of the ways that I set myself apart from other people. And it's nerve wracking, no matter how much you do it. And even a lot of the times I've spoken, it's to a group of 40 or 50 or 60 people. And I know 2/3 of them I already know. It's still, there's this energy that
Right.
it stops about right here where you
Yeah.
don't need it to. And it's just nice to have, practice of lengthening the spine, or coming back to center, and or even.
Well, it's interesting that you said, Mark, that you said it comes up to here and you pointed at your throat, because the throat, of course, is that's the energy center where we project our voice and where we speak our truth, and where, who we are coming from the heart feeds the throat. And then, so when we allow that energy to come up and then move out from there, it might be okay to not be necessarily accessing all of the, confusing thoughts that are happening up in the head. Of course, we want all the channels to be open, but it's good when it's coming from below. And like you said, like you gestured, that energy when we're on a stage, or when the stakes are high or higher than just ordinary day-to-day life,
Yeah.
that it does come from below. We can feel it building up. And when we can really open and relax, the ways in which we can have influence or impact, especially for sales. I work a lot with business people. I work a lot with lawyers. I recently worked with a lawyer who did a Supreme Court. She did a case in front of the Supreme Court, and we had worked a lot on her story, because I'm a storytelling coach as well as the energy and meditation to prepare herself, because she did get a tremendous amount of pushback. I was able to watch it. They streamed, the Supreme Court of Canada streams live, so I was able to watch her stand in utter grace and power in a very, very confrontational type of environment. Really powerful to see her work these skills. And I mean, I think she was surprised by how much pushback she got there. And there's a lot that I can say about why and what that was, but she had a huge success with that. It was really amazing. So it was really like, again, letting that throat chakra have really send energy out that way, which as a speaker. And even if you're just in a sales conversation, it's really important to be able to know how to move that energy in order to have true connection. Because when we're in sales, it's really, to me, it's still about service, right? Unless it's not.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of
Right,
sales.
which is the wrong kind of sale. Yeah.
Right. But to me, the most effective sales is when we really want to raise the energy of the people that we're wanting to serve. So being able to be in touch with how you're moving your energy in your body is key.
Yeah.
And you know how, Mark. You
It's
totally know how. You do.
it is and you brought up when the stakes are high, because I think one of the most, really the most profound things, and it's simple, is that you can practice when the stakes aren't high.
Mhm.
And that's, if you just wait until the stakes are high and you think, well, I'm gonna be fully present, I'm gonna be fully authentic. If you haven't practiced in that's another container I call, in the safety of the dojo, or in the safety of your own practice. So that practice is when the stakes are high, because sometimes we don't know when the stakes are going to be high. So that's one of the things I learned from you, is that I'm practicing these things, and I don't do it every day. And I do a water series, and I'm trying to think if I learned that from you or I picked it up from somewhere else, but like a drilling for water series. And then they all have to do with water, like pumping water, and then a fountain, an energy fountain that you reach down, and it's just and then you shoot the energy from the side, and then the last part is a rowing.
Mhm.
And I don't do it. I try to do it about 5 or 6 times a week. I never go a week without it, but it's not like I do it every day. but it's a practice. And then there's sometimes when I do it and it's just kind of going through the motions. And there's sometimes where it's like, man, I'm really glad I have this.
I know what you mean. Yes.
And then I noticed, I went back and I watched some of your work and other practitioners, and I got really rigid with how I was doing it. Like the way I'm drilling the water, it's not really the Tao or the way of nature. Everything is like, I'm the one doing it instead of kind of moving with flow. And the rowing was the one thing, like the rowing is supposed to be this just with the water. And I was doing this like, like I'm rowing somewhere. And it was just funny to practice with somebody. And I think this, so kind of saying all this, that I think it's important. A lot of this stuff, I'm really glad I practice it in community and not just by myself, because if you're by yourself, you do get these weird things like, oh yeah, I'm moving my energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
and practicing the group. So what do you think?
I think that there's an amazing synergy in working in community. And I think, that's one of the reasons, I didn't know when the pandemic started and I started doing more online classes, because I was relieved in a way because I had been traveling so much before that. I'd been to Europe and teaching in Europe and then in India and East Coast and Canada. I mean, I'd been traveling a lot the previous months. And so it was good to stop. But then I was able to stay in touch with all of these people through doing these online classes. And what I saw was that this energy that I call the chi field, or living in the chi field, we could still do it. Even if people were watching the recording, they could tap into something that was bigger than just ourselves. And I think there's something about that. We are not meant to go alone. We are meant, if you want to go far, go with others, with the African proverb. You want to really be able to have that sense of connection. And I think that, also to be reminded that the idea behind, at least behind Qigong, is effortlessness, right? So when we're in a place of trying really hard to get it right and get these details and this and that, we are moving out of the spirit of why to do it in the first place, which is to really allow ourselves to, as the saying goes, go with the flow, to allow flow to happen and not to feel like we have to make things grow by pulling up the shoots, right?
Right.
Let
Yeah.
them, give them the right environment to flourish. And Qigong is doing that, these energy practices, whatever it is, not just Qigong. I mean, any energy practice does. I have a particular affinity for Qigong, but there's many different ways yoga and other types of energy work.
Yeah. And the effortlessness is Wu Wei, right? It's or non-action or non-force.
Exactly right.
There's Wu Wei and Wei Qi are the two that we talk
Qi
about.
has to do with your externalized energy. Nei Qi has to do with your internal energy. So when we can start to work with the two together in conjunction, that's when we're really at a place where we can be very peaceful, because we don't have to hide or we don't have to project. It's just you're just emitting. You're just who you are, and you're emitting.
And when I mentioned the stakes are high, it's another thing that I've trained a lot of people in this, and that the stakes in business, it's always great. I've practiced relationships and building great relationships. I've had a lot of great mentors, but it's so much easier to do in business than it is with your family of origin or your family, because the stakes are higher. And there's a story, and I hope you're willing to share, but I read on your some of the work you talked about your relationship with your father, and how that relationship transformed and how you've used this energy. Would you mind sharing some of that? Because I've had important relationships that were healed. I still have some I'm working on, but I would love it if you could share something about how you transformed your relationship with your father.
Yeah, well, I'd be happy to. Well, when I've actually, I think I mentioned to you before we actually started the recording that I actually did a whole solo show about this, what called "What's Wrong with a Mouse," about my relationship with my dad, which was a huge influence in my life. When I was a little kid, I felt like we had this really special connection, and he doted on me. I was kind of a favorite child. I have two younger brothers, but I was definitely his little girl. And as I got into adolescence, that became fraught. And and when I came out as a lesbian, then basically, you know, the dirt hit the fan, as they
Yeah,
say.
the fertilizer hit the ventilator.
Fertilizer hit the dispersal system. Um, uh, and he disowned me. He actually disowned me twice. First disowned me because I told him I was going to move in with my boyfriend back when I was in my late teens. And then he disowned me and we didn't speak for 10 years. And then 10 years later, we started to reconnect and he found out I was a lesbian. And so he disowned me again. So the thing is with an Italian patriarch of a father is, you're either a virgin or a mother, but there should be nothing in between those two most states of being. No hanky panky. So anyway, so basically when he disowned me as a lesbian, because I was a lesbian, he basically said he didn't ever want to see me again. He didn't want anything to do with me. And that was very difficult. And I did a lot of work, sending letters saying, trying to, how come you can't see me? I love you the way you are. Can't you love me the way all kinds of, pretty defensive letters and pleading and angry and all kinds of ways that I responded. And then finally I just thought, well, I have to let him go. But the thing is that then my dad had been actually very, very critical. He always thought women shouldn't, women were there to support men in their genius. They weren't supposed to have any particular talents of their own. So anytime I performed or spoke or did something that was public and really out there, it was like I could see his face frowning at me on top of every face in the audience. It was like I projected that out. So it was kind of an awful internalization that I did. And then I met somebody who changed my life. Her name is Sharon Strand Ellison, and she teaches something called powerful non-defensive communication, which for me, when I first learned it, was like, oh, this is the language of Wei Qi. Wei Qi being that externalized positive energy, what I think of as I am, as opposed to you can't. It's that sense of it, how we can emit. And she had language for how to break down what defensiveness is, what are the different modes of defensiveness. And rather than thinking of being defensive or defenseless, what if we could come up with something else that was non-defensive, which was absolutely in alignment with everything that I was teaching and thinking about in terms of energetics and Qigong. And so I was talking, she became a very dear friend. And I was talking with her one day about my dad and said, I just have to let him go. She said, I think you have to write him one more letter. So I spent a year writing a letter and bringing it to her saying, and she'd say, no, this is still defensive and that's defensive. And I'd go back and I'd stick it in a drawer and then I'd pull it out again. I'd write it again. It was this big process, this year-long process. But eventually I sent it to him. And the boundary that I put at the end was, if you're willing to read this and connect with me, I'd love to see you. But if you're not, I'm going to do everything I can to let go of the influence that your rejection has had on me. He wrote back 2 days later. I mean, immediately after 20 years of silence, he wrote back and said, well, you're the one that's a problem, not me, And so I talked that, I showed that to my friend Sharon, see, he's
See, I was right all along.
he said, no, he's actually just telling you what his position is, where he's coming from.
Yeah.
And so then over time, I started to go visit him. And bit by bit, it was hard at first, but we started to slowly come back together, which was an amazing thing. And I remember one day, his wife would, every now and then his wife would take a break, and I was the only person he trusted to come and take care of him. He needed caretaking at that point, other than his wife. And so I would go and be with him. Either that, or I was also, he thought of me as a spinster who didn't have anything better to do. But anyway, I would go and take care of him. And we started to have bigger and bigger conversations. And one of the last times I visited him before going to and being with him as he died, because I was with him in his dying process and then as he took his last breath, was that he was like, we actually had conversations about, what happened? How did you become a lesbian? And I was able to tell him a little bit about the journey and what it was. And then all of a sudden, he started telling me about a young man he knew when he was at Juilliard who was gay and had committed suicide. We started having these really deep conversations. I remember the reason I call my show "What's Wrong with the Mouse" is because one of the conversations after we talked about my being queer was he said, I've been thinking about this, and you know, I like to pet a cat. It's really nice to pet a cat, but I never would want to pet a mouse because a mouse. I mean, no, you don't want to do that. That's not natural. But a cat, a cat feels good. But now I think about it. What's wrong with a mouse? So. um,
That's a great story. And that's the title of the show, is What's Wrong with the Mouse. That is beautiful.
And then when he died, when he was dying, we had some amazing conversations as he was dying. And one of the last things he said to me, really, I think it was about 3 days or 2 days before he died, he looked at me and he said, Vic, I haven't really liked you for most of your life, but I realize now you're an angel. And, I know I'm no angel, but there was the level of transformation that happened between he didn't want to ever see or talk to me again to a place of absolute connection and just nothing there but love and recognition that that's all that mattered. And I attribute that a lot to my practice, because I remember him saying at one point, you didn't get into Juilliard. That must have taught you something. And in the past, I would have felt defensive and like scared or angry or having to prove something. But I remember this sensation of this energy traveling up my spine, and it felt like there was a breeze blowing through my hair, and I just felt utterly relaxed and energized at the same time. And I was able to talk to him about, he told, he was saying, when you were rejected from Juilliard, that must have told you you didn't have talent. And I said, yeah, that's exactly what I thought. And this is what I did in my life, and how I've drawn these things together. And I've created this Way of Joy, which I think is based a lot on how you think. And he's like, what do you mean? And I told him why I thought it was connected to him and his creativity. So it was this series of conversations that kept just turning, shifting, using the Wei Qi concepts and this powerful non-defensive communication, which if people want to know about it, pndc.com, can't recommend it highly enough. It transformed my relationship with my father from being disowned into a place where I truly feel at peace. He is now, I when I did this show for years, I did it for many years, and I performed it, I don't know, hundreds of times. It always felt like a ritual of gratitude, which I didn't know I would be able to get to, because I had to work on my own defensiveness so much to get there. It was my job.
It is such a beautiful story. And I really thank you for sharing that, because there's, people that's close. It's one of the things I see people, I've been in that, I've had relationships that were important to me that I've had to, and gone 10 years without, you don't have to be right or wrong or right to make a difference, with somebody. And I have so much respect for you, and hanging the letter that you wrote. And I think all the things about that story is you stayed with it. Even that final letter took a year of coming back. And we will have a link to the communication. What is it? Powerful non-defensive communication?
Yeah, pndc.com. Mm-hmm.
And we'll have that on the show notes.
Great.
And it's such a beautiful story. And I think that's the thing that in my container of joy, that's the thing I have the most sorrow for, is relationships that I see with people, and it's parents and siblings. It's a lot, I think. And I think we all share as human, as part of the human connection, that there's this thing with our parents, that there's what's wrong with the mouse. We all need to figure out. Yes. That is so beautiful. Well, Vicki, this has been so awesome. You are such a great teacher, such a great master. I have taken your online Qigong classes. I'm going to take more. I'm going to read the ebook. Thank you for joining us on the Tao of Pizza.
Well, thank you so much for having the Tao of Pizza, and also for the work that you do in the world, because what I know about you is that you're doing the work that you do with your business, but that there's what's driving you behind that business is so rich and so multi-layered. And I know that is, that's also sending energy out to people. So I really, I bow and respect to who you are and how you integrate, and it's just the beauty that you bring to the world. So thank you so much. It's been an honor to connect with you. It always lifts my heart to see you.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Vicki. Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. I can't say the pleasure is all mine because we're sharing, but
Yeah,
you're
we
so
argue about
beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. And it reminds me of 20 years, like nothing has changed in 20 years when I see your face. And it's
yeah.
like right there. So thank
I
you.
don't think I was quite as white and gray as 20 years ago, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have looked at you like a sister too, that like you said before with the practice. So
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
much love.
You're a fellow journeyer, and I love that. I love that, having that with you. It's very rich.
Thanks for listening to the Tao of Pizza podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.